CanMar Morning Talk Show, a fresh take on what's happening in the global cannabis and psychedelic space. Your power shot of cannabis and psychedelics knowledge, featuring the industry's hottest experts, thought leaders, trendsetters, influencers, and celebrities. I'm your host, Melissa. Join me and our esteemed guest as we reflect on the current and future climate of the global cannabis and psychedelics industry. Today's guest is an incredible woman who needs very little introduction. A cannabis consultant, influencer, investigative journalist, author, entrepreneur, and self-proclaimed canna-tech nerd, the one and only Marguerite Arnold. Marguerite has a long tenure in the cannabis industry, from her personal journey with the plant to building a career in the industry. Stay tuned to hear more about Marguerite's story, from her pioneering account of becoming an expat in Germany to her thoughts on the future of European cannabis and beyond. Guys, stick around. You don't want to miss out on this one. So Marguerite, welcome to the CanMar Morning Talk Show. It's wonderful to have you here today. I love to start off by asking my guests a little bit about their backstory, how they became involved in the cannabis industry. So take us through your personal journey in the world of cannabis.
Well, it's been a long one, I think, as many people have. It didn't start when I was a kid and me thinking that I wanted to have this career in cannabis. In fact, in my 20s and 30s, I worked in national political media in Washington, as well as politics, DC, and then moved to New York and had a career in banking, with technology sort of floating all over this, and finance. And then kind of, I would say, a typical American catch-all kind of career kind of thing. But I was in New York City, had just been hit by the financial meltdown of the banks because I was working in a bank. And then I got sick. I mean, like really sick, and was allergic to all sorts of drugs, went through a period where I actually couldn't speak for about 3 years. And, it was one of those terrible situations. This was 2008, so way before any real cannabis reform had happened anywhere. But I had always sort of had an eye out to the cannabis industry, because such as it was, because I had a lot of friends who were gay, like in the 1990s, for example, and in the AIDS community, cannabis was absolutely always in the room by that time. So, I was not, I would say, as prejudiced. In fact, I wasn't prejudiced at all. My age group is, I would say, slightly more conservative than the boomers in lots of ways. And also, I mean, when we were kids, for example, we also had to endure the onslaught of, just say no kinds of campaigns that were so broad and so stupid that they sort of lumped everything into one demon drug, ball of wax. And that was sort of where that conversation was for a long time. In the 90s in particular, sort of, I would say late 80s, early 90s, obviously there was much more of an interest in the evolving medical discussion. But again, before I left the United States, there was really no cannabis industry to speak of. In terms of background, I grew up in England. My dad was a German Holocaust era Jew. So even at that point, I was thinking, how could I move back to Europe to begin with? And this was also before Brexit. So at the time, I thought, well, I'll just move back to Germany, because my dad was a German Jew, and there's a special exemption in the German Constitution which says that you're supposed to be able to get citizenship in 3 months if you present paperwork, etc. And I figured at that point, maybe I'll just get my German citizenship, which will give me EU residence again and the rights here, and then maybe just hop over the pond to go to England. This was pre-Brexit. So I landed here in 2000, and I think the third reason, was also I knew that the cannabis industry was coming, right? I think by that period of time, I also kind of felt, as many people who go through life-threatening situations feel, that are then helped by cannabis, that this was the only career path that I was really interested in for the rest of my life, and to bring all of the different skill sets and backgrounds that I had to it to make it go forward in whatever other way I could. So I landed here in 2013 and immediately got into a legal tangle, because as it had turned out, during the 1950s, when there were still a lot of, I would say, fascist judges and lawyers left in the system by the Allies after World War II, they passed all sorts of really onerous case law, basically preventing Jews from ever coming back, which is one of those sort of hidden little story secrets that no one really knew until my case. And then, of course, like people like my family, who were paid a pittance in the the sort of payments that were made after the war, plus all of this sort of resentment, and we would never want to go back to live in a country that did this. All of this kind of, I would say, combined to create an environment where there was technically, legally, this exception in German law, but in terms of case law and actual processing, Jews were as verboten as cannabis in this country ever since the 1930s. So I found a great lawyer after being turned down by all of these constitutional experts. And they said, and he said, look, we'll just take it. And it ended up going all the way to the Supreme Court. And I changed the law, basically, and the application of the law in 2020, and became a dual citizen. Along the way, though, participating in the German cannabis industry, as a journalist, which was my first way in, certainly in 2014, there wasn't much here, covering it in English, because I think there's a lot of real interest in what's going on in Germany in particular, and getting through not only the language, but understanding a bit more about what's going on the ground, I think is really interesting to a lot of people. Got my MBA finally, and angered just about everybody in my class and my teachers by insisting I was going to do a technology approach to cannabis. Like, it was use blockchain, but there was no token system. It was more like a smart contract fintech system that proposed to track medical cannabis dispensations, as well as act as a seed to sale tracking agent, but also incorporating the back end. So for the first time, there might have been a very comprehensive, privacy sensitive record of what people who are really sick are taking and how that interacts with other drugs, et cetera. So who knows, it might come back, but I think that the discussion in Germany generally on digitalization of everything is done slow. This was a very difficult path to take. We actually did, I think, get a decent way with it. And I established myself in the industry. So, as the startup kind of went its own way for lack of funding, since 2019, the end of 2019, I've also increasingly worked in things like sourcing and financing, because I think that there's a natural fit, and I know everybody in the ecosystem. So at this point, I'm part of the industry, even if a bit of a hyphenated hybrid, but then again, how perfect for this industry. I am working, closely at this point with a German distributor. We are planning all sorts of really cool stuff. And I think that in part, I'm at this point really looking forward to using both my business background as well as my understanding of how the industry has to go forward in an environment where just last week, there was actually a really big development here, which namely is that Germany is really on the cusp of becoming one of the most valuable recreational markets on the planet. It already is one of the most valuable medical markets. And I can discuss a little bit about that as we go forward. But since 2017, there have been multiple issues with patient access that have everything to do with doctors not being educated, not knowing how to deal with cannabis, not knowing how to deal with a patient who might be able to say, look, I need this kind of percentage. Oh, and by the way, I need THC and CBD, and whether, whatever brand name the strain has, working with doctors to understand a little bit more about that. So that's one of the biggest issues. The second issue, though, is the insurance companies have absolutely fought reimbursement because, again, it's very expensive. So the supply chain itself and I would say the fragmented nature of the distribution network in Germany, starting with the fact that there is no pharmacy chain, right? By law, you're only allowed to have 4 pharmacies under one owner. So this entire discussion is getting going in an environment where there are still cannabis in the market that's way too expensive at every point on the way. The pricing issues themselves are getting worked out. And I think that part of the I would say, excitement about, the coming recreational market has been the industry itself, which is saying, look, we want to obviously have more sales, but it's been very difficult for the industry to navigate some of these bigger issues. Sure, there's a lot of cannabis coming into this country every year. About 20 tons is being imported. About half of that is actually being prescribed. Right. So there are many, many issues that remain for the industry even to deal with that. Beyond that, though, I think the government is realizing that taking a jump way ahead of everybody else in Europe, namely even jumping ahead of someone like Switzerland in creating a full boat legal recreational market, literally from this point of the medical discussion, is going to be counterproductive. And I think that that was actually a really smart. I mean, it was a smart way to proceed, including the fact that I think that they are not just going to leave the issue there. There's going to be decrim, I think, by this summer. They are absolutely talking about limited home grow and cannabis social clubs, which I think is that first, that first interim step into a fully fledged recreational market, and for a number of reasons. In Canada, for example, where the entire commercial market was built on people who knew how to do financial engineering and backing a shell company into a mining company and creating a public cannabis company out of that, and then using that money to go in and buy small existing patient groups. Well, that didn't really work. I think that what we've seen in the last couple of years everywhere, but certainly in Europe, is the explosion of these models that were A, financially engineered to begin with, B, were absolutely taking unsustainable business models, starting with the fact that they started all these huge grows. And they started to base the valuation of the industry on the plants that they were growing as opposed to what they were actually selling. And in the meantime, not really thinking about pricing, being caught in the middle of every discussion about taxation and regulation that made the product much more expensive than the black market. And even in a situation, where the government tried so hard to control sales that initially they said that this was only going to be done through regulated government outlets, et cetera, et cetera. Well, obviously what's happened in Canada has gone through several different upgrades and revisions and et cetera, et cetera. What is happening in the US, I think, is even more salient to what the Germans were afraid of, which is basically a Wild West market where the only real financing, actually, as it turned out, for the biggest multi-state operator had actually come from Russian oligarchic related and connected funds. Whoops. So, there had been a couple, and again, I mean, the last 24 months, even post-COVID, you've seen sort of this slow motion implosion of an industry which got started any way it really could, but then ran into the inevitable blocks of no sustainable business plan, crazy financing, off the wall valuations, and all of the rest that we've literally seen explode recently. So I think that in this situation, it actually is very pro-patient in an environment like Germany to say, okay, we're going to decrim this. We're going to give you the ability to at least get some access that's not going to end up costing you €1,000 a month, which is about what people pay for rent. I mean, that's outrageous. And in an environment where healthcare is mandatory, you can't not have healthcare coverage in this country. So the German experiment is rattling along. I think it's, the conventional wisdom, certainly the BS coming out of Berlin a lot is really focused on down the road and promotion and waving flags. And while that's all very good, increasingly there's a disconnect between that and what is actually going on in the industry itself. So I think that what you're going to see, to wrap this up, is going forward, you're going to see companies who have managed to establish themselves in the medical segment then being able to expand their reach creatively into a larger patient segment, which may or may not have insurance coverage, but there will be better priced product within the market and more accessible to people. So obtaining insurance coverage is great, but it's not going to keep people out of the legal market, which is really important. And at the same time, the government is really going to have to think about, all of the particulars that go along with legalization of this kind and at this level. Keeping in mind that the last formal, I would say, the cultivation bid, right? There was a big push to actually grow medical cannabis here in Germany. That I would say pretty much failed. There's only, just in every direction. He got sued. It was inefficient. They didn't really think about what should happen. I think going forward, clearly this is probably going to be under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health, but they have to come up with everything, including licensing regulations, the actual paperwork of licenses. I mean, this is Germany too, right? So they, who is going to work with them to roll these programs out? Not only, it's not going to happen on a federal level, it's going to happen on a municipal level, at the city level. So all of those really big discussions have absolutely got to be addressed. And I think that given all of the barriers and the whoopsies and the we don't really know what's going to happen, and we don't want to present a draft law in Germany that's going to get turned down at the EU level, I think that everybody decided, okay, let's not just kick the can down the road, let's do something positive. But you're not going to see a full legalization discussion in Germany starting this summer or even next.
Yeah, I think it's a wild ride, right? And it's completely crazy to me that, €1,000 per month. That's just completely ludicrous as well, And I think what you said about accessibility is so true. And these are the people that actually need to be using this plant. And I think that's a big issue. And clearly a long road to go, but it's hopefully looking positive, right?
Well, it is. And here's the other thing. I think that there are companies in the industry right now who are trying to address the other bigger issues, which are, again, the supply chain has been so choppy and inefficient that there are people who have, yes, there are people who have arbitraged the prices in this market to make a quick profit. Yes, there are always going to be that. But I think that there are players coming into the market, especially now, who have managed to create a much more efficient business environment. Supply chain are going to be able to come in offering way more competitive prices, right, to begin with. And beyond that, I think that every aspect of the supply chain is now realizing that the markups on this drug system, as it were still excessive, right? The idea is that if the government has said that in their estimate it costs €1.15 to grow a gram of medical cannabis indoors in Germany with German labor rates and German electricity costs and everything else, then the question then becomes, what is so valuable and or costly in that supply chain that is creating cannabis that's getting to market, if you really want to think about what a pharmacy is doing, that is 10 times more expensive? What are they doing, right? And so I think that entire discussion... Well, to a certain extent, there are legitimate discussions, right? If you're a cannabis supplier, you have to follow the law in terms of having, a proper place to store it. That also has to get approved by regional authorities. There are expensive people that you have to employ at every point of this, starting with qualified personnel who have, scientific backgrounds. The salespeople that you're bringing into this are actually pharmaceutical salespeople who are used to getting a salary of, certainly maybe not six figures right to start out, but certainly 70, 80 grand is not unheard of, and that's pretty standard. So you're already within a pharmaceutical discussion, which is completely different than any other discussion anywhere else on the planet, including Canada, because Canada did not create an EU GMP certified conversation before they flipped into recreational. So to the extent that there are those costs, I'll give you another one. Pharmacies, for example, are not allowed just to give a patient, prepackaged stuff. Whatever they receive from any distributor, right, they have to literally open and then repackage in something else. And that is true of both flower and dronabinol. So because they are operating, I would say, basically on a retail rather than a real wholesale level, certainly, people like me who are used to a pharmaceutical, a chain, for example, like Walgreens or CVS in the United States, operating nationally and having those bulk buys and that wholesale market plus the discounts that come with it, that does not exist here really. So What I would say is, though, I mean, I'm really excited about what I'm going to start to do. I think that there are people who are now looking at that and saying, okay, the model that we tried to get into this was wrong. It costs too much. Obviously supply chains are becoming a lot more efficient. How can we make money as a distributor, for example, in an environment where we know actually that we have to meet a different kind of cost point? How can we, as a pharmacy, knowing that we have brick and mortar and staff to pay and all of those things, how can we make money in this environment? At the same time, lowering the overall cost for patients, because that is really, I'd say, the next big hurdle that this market has to deal with. In Canada, there was the whole discussion of, well, there's the black market and then it's us versus the black market. Here, there is very much a discussion of the pharmaceutical certifications, but then also understanding that you have to create a drug that is cost efficient enough to make everybody a little bit of profit all the way along, beat the black market, right? And also be medical grade, which is a combination of things which has never existed on the planet before. So I think that there are increasingly people who are saying, look, it's not just about my quick short-term profit and selling wholesale dronabinol by the liter for over 6 figures. I mean, there was a point actually recently where a liter of dronabinol, which is THC extract of the medical kind, was wholesaling in the German market for over 100,000 euros per liter, which is highway robbery if you really understand about the cost involved and everything else. But that was being allowed to exist because of the lack of patience, because the supply chain was very, very inefficient and fractured, because there were companies who got in and quickly made a quick buck off of that opportunity. And while that's part of capitalism, that is not how the German government in particular has tried to arrange healthcare generally. I mean, again, most of the drugs that you get when you go to your doctor who writes a prescription and you go to the pharmacy are A, generic, and B, you pay as a patient a max of 10 euros a month for your prescription, no matter what that prescription is. I mean, sometimes it's even free, depending on what the drug is. So that is how the cannabis industry has had to fit itself into the German market, which has been painful. I don't think that that's going to be vastly different throughout Europe. And I also think that a lot of these countries now are looking at Germany and Luxembourg in particular, and saying, okay, how do we create a real bifurcated market where we may not have every single user having a easily identified medical problem and being able to go to a doctor and identify that and get the prescription, but at the same time, we want to cut out the black market, right? And we want to do so in a way that makes sense, because again, one of the biggest problems in both the United States and Canada right now is that the legalization models that have been implemented absolutely are not competitive. I mean, most of the big multi-state operators that you've heard about have basically moved out of the West Coast of the US, California, Oregon, all of those, Washington State, all of those places where there was more of a cultural or traditional cannabis industry to begin with, because they can't compete. Now, again, those smaller operators are also running into trouble in terms of costs, in terms of the regulation that also costs money. So there haven't been really any real answers. And what I think is about to happen in Germany is the next piece of an experiment, which so far has been unique in the world. And despite the many, many issues and problems, starting with patient safety, right? It still has a lot to teach the world and has a lot of exciting things to come within it.
Absolutely. And, I think that there are a lot of growing pains. There's a lot to figure out that, the industry is still so young. So we kind of have to learn from what everyone else does. And it's very interesting to see. And I think we are going to learn, the rest of the world's going to learn a lot from how Germany progresses, for sure.
Yeah, and I think, there is a connection. There are a lot of obviously Australian firms looking here. Just about everybody is looking at the German market right now globally. Certainly outside the US, everybody is interested in this market. The flip side is not everybody can put together a business plan and a business operational structure that works. Most people can't. And part of it is, let's say you have an American company or a Canadian company which has managed to finance, let's say, production in Portugal. Let's just use that as one example, or Spain, or they're bringing stuff in through those countries to get it certified with the goal of getting to the German market. I think that increasingly those companies who started in the time before now, right, are finding that their cost structure makes them fundamentally not competitive to what is coming. I mean, if you've based your entire business plan on selling tons of cannabis into the German market at 18 grams, 18 euros a gram wholesale, which some of them did, as their corporate reports will show, those are going to be fundamentally money-losing businesses from the get-go because it's not sustainable. And so while they may have gotten into that market selling really expensive cannabis in very, very small amounts to whoever, those days are way gone. I mean, everyone right now, I think, is looking at how do we bring in cannabis that is priced for the market and priced for the consumer beyond whether it's priced for the health insurer. And right now there are very strict sort of barriers put on not only who can grow it in Germany, but how much you can actually sell it for, which is a very interesting conversation to have. And I don't really think that that has trickled out anywhere in the rest of the world. So again, I think the German market by its definition is one of the most challenging, but it is also, once people start to get this right, one of the most lucrative, because I would say that there are, if you think about statistically of any population anywhere, whether it's Germany or France or Australia or whatever, that just based on, I would say, a very high level, look at statistics, generally between 10 to 15% of your adult population that is not elderly, right, working population, is going to have some sort of very serious disability. The reality also is, even though there are still not full studies to support this, a lot of those conditions can be effectively treated with cannabis. And I'll give you an example, epilepsy, right? From the perspective of a policymaker anywhere in Europe, adult onset epilepsy is absolutely a public policy number one issue because it costs the government so much money. I mean, if you are a working person and then all of a sudden have an onset of a serious condition like epilepsy or cancer or a movement disorder or etc., if you are then completely unable to work, the government is then going to be on the hook for you for all of your rent, $500 a month cash, your health insurance, and all of your medicine and all of your treatment. So if you think about the fact that yes, cannabis is still expensive, but for under €1,000, you can actually make somebody capable of working again, as opposed to pushing them off into disability and permanent poverty, which is really unpleasant generally. And this is not a discussion about, healthcare benefits and the social state, but generally, I mean, if you are on disability and that is your only source of income, you are at the poverty line. Yeah. That's reality, right? So if a government has to support that, whatever that is, because there's a condition that you suffer from that there's no treatment for, versus an investment in a plant that even if they have to pay, in Germany, the maximum I think is 120 grams per month per patient. Relatively normally, you could get more, but that's kind of like the top limit, right? Right. So let's just say that that's being, put through the system at a generic price. That is still going to cost the government, even if you're saying that's going to cost the government $1,000 a month, that's going to cost the government less than completely supporting somebody and putting somebody in a situation where their lives are ruined. You can't work and you are stuck in a system which is pretty horrible. So I'd say that there are going to be more and more of those discussions as this goes forward, simply because, I mean, there's a big discussion also about the ability of people in their 50s and above to work in an environment where all of the discussions about retirement age are on the map. I mean, I'm in my 50s, right? So I have at least another decade to 15 years of working, right? That is, this is the kind of discussion that's going to have to be had for certainly my demographic, it's like, why would you want to push somebody like me out of the workforce and make it completely difficult for me to work, pay my rent, and live a fairly decent life with experience, with graduate degrees, et cetera. But I mean, those are the kinds of conversations that are going to increasingly happen. And cannabis is going to be right in the middle of that. It absolutely is. I mean, forget my business experience, forget the fact I've got 30 plus years internationally. The reality is, if I can't get that drug, I am crippled and I will work far less efficiently. It's not that I completely cannot work, but my life post, prescription is a lot better, and I am much more effective, and I can basically live a life that looks normal and is pretty much normal. And that, I think, is definitely the kinds of conversation that are going to get incorporated with a cannabis flair into all of these discussions about wellness and longevity, and making sure that, you're able to take care of these conditions, which in the past have completely knocked people out of society and their lives and any sort of enjoyment of, a human life. I mean, Parkinson's is another great example. So as I said, I think that this is part of an ongoing discussion everywhere. How that gets paid for, how this industry evolves is absolutely part of it. But I think that one of the reasons we've seen so many failures and financial flameouts, to be direct, is that, again, the early movers were very much paying the premium of revolution. Right? If you're doing this for the first time, if there's not an infrastructure set up, if there's a lot of upfront costs, if you're getting into this to be a first mover and whoopsie daisy, there's a 6 month to 18-month delay on regulatory policy that allows you to do what you need to do. All of these things are going to tie into having, I would say, a sustainable market.
Absolutely. I think it's a very interesting point, that you brought up, and it becomes a conversation about quality of life and also contribution to society. And I think that's a very interesting point that we should be discussing more. I think that should be definitely part of the discussion. Do you think that Germany will, if, depending on how things go, do you think it will become a benchmark for other countries who want to legalize, and become part of this kind of conversation?
I would say in some ways yes, and in some ways no, right? I mean, I think that there are aspects of the German conversation which are now definitely impacting North America. For example, the entire conversation about healthcare coverage. Up until very recently, Germany was really the only country that was doing this. Shockingly, Holland, there were Dutch insurers that were actually covering and agreeing to compensate users up until 2017. Now, granted, there weren't very many of them, but after 2017, when the German government changed its own laws, every single Dutch health insurer stopped covering cannabis in Holland for people who were sick. Which was crazy. I think part of it was because there was only one company that was authorized to export medical cannabis. The government didn't want to take anything away from that company. And they figured, well, if you're sick and you're Dutch, you can just go to a cannabis smoke shop, right? Which is not also a very good solution if you're really sick and you have to have a lot every month. But regardless, since that, the German government absolutely did put that line in the sand. I think Australia, as a result of that, followed for all of the issues that have been seen in that market. Luxembourg certainly followed. There are other countries in Europe right now who are absolutely on the cusp of this. But again, the whole discussion here in Germany from the medical perspective was so revolutionary, as much as it has never been properly implemented, because it basically said German healthcare is required by law, and therefore, if you are sick, the health insurer is required to cover this drug if it has been prescribed for you by a doctor. And that is where but again, it's like these guys didn't want to pay all of this money, and I don't, they're business oriented as well, right? So it's a tough conversation to have, right? But in that sense, the German market has been very revolutionary now, because even in the US, there are health insurers who are now being put on the spot, Awesome, right? That's a really important one. I think beyond that, though, the government was the first in the world to try and come up with some sort of cost structure for this industry, which includes everything from cultivation through distribution and ultimately retail sales at point of sale at pharmacy. And that absolutely is having a huge knock-on effect on other policies that are coming through, including how much pharmacies are able to mark stuff up, how much the entire supply chain pretty much is able to make, logistically, as well as setting up this whole discussion about EU GMP, which rightly or wrongly, I think is a quality discussion that this industry absolutely required. There are still, to this day, major scandals in the US about testing and certification. You hear them less out of Canada, but then again, Canada was also the home of a lot of other weird stuff, from the financial finagling to even CanTrust, which was a public cannabis company that went bust, and there was a big explosion in 2019 because they had been setting up illegal black grow rooms. They had gotten a license from Health Canada, but they were still setting up illegal grow rooms and selling this product even into Europe. I mean, at an EU GMP market. So I think that those are the kinds of explosions. You're not going to see too much of that ever again. I don't think those days are over. But I think what you are going to start to see is different slicing and dicing of what it means to be GMP. For example, right? If you grow inside in Europe under, for example, in a very clean growing room, which is not technically EU GMP, but then you have it dried in an EUG facility, that is being taken as being EU GMP, right? In an environment where more and more people are saying, I don't want you to just radiate my bud. I mean, nobody likes radiation here, which is, again, a standard pharmaceutical response to bringing in a plant-based product, right? If you don't want bugs on this, microbes and things you don't want there, well, sure, we just normally will zap it and then there's no issue. Well, right, but then you're hitting not only the cultural opposition to radiating your food that exists here, up to the point where actually the biggest volume food that is radiated within the EU is on a regular basis is frozen frog's legs. It has nothing to do with like, it's a completely different conversation. But as a result of this, there has been this huge battle on the ground here about, okay, so if I grow it outside and I radiate this stuff, sure, that is one way to get it to EU GMP. The problem is that radiation fundamentally affects the taste and the operations of the flower itself. Cannabinoids working together with terpenes. I mean, you can't just stick it in the oven, right, and expect there to be no knock-on effect. So I think that is a conversation also that's had to knock through the system, including in a place like Germany, where the whole debate, whether it was radiated or not, then created the next discussion about whether if it is radiated, then a distributor then has to have very expensive insurance to specifically deal with radiated products, which again adds an additional level of complication and cost in an environment which has pretty much been cost sensitive since the get-go. And there are always people that are trying to find ways around this. But I think ultimately the most effective way is to come up with a business plan and create a seed to sale environment and supply chain, which is a commodity supply chain, which is sustainable, as green as possible, local as possible, and actually delivering, a drug, a plant, in a way that you would deliver more or less tomatoes or any other kind of commodity. And that's where we're definitely going. Yeah. Now, I mean, throw the recreational conversation in on top of that, which is another reason I think why the government put the blinking lights on this. And unless you really do have rules and a cultural environment which accepts them, right, then you're just going to have a mess. Because if you think about this from an enforcement perspective, how do you tell the difference between illegal and legal cannabis if you're a customs officer, if you're a police officer, if you're, any of these places that require certification and tracking? they can't tell the difference. So in that kind of environment, while there are obviously issues that relate to certification, testing, consumer safety, they have not been met yet, even by the regular industry. Pricing those into the supply chain is something which has yet to happen. And the only way that that's going to happen is if you seed, I would say, a healthy medical market that is not based on BS financials and pie in the sky expansions, but actually what the average cannabis patient would be able to afford if they had to buy it for themselves.
That would be the ideal situation, right? Not always as easy, but yeah.
Well, I mean, this is the thing about this, and I say this as a patient with an MBA. Obviously, if you're constructing your business, right, you have to think about ultimately the cost of goods sold and the retail, wholesale discussion. If you are routinely pricing a product that you hope everybody will use in the gold standard of pricing, then ultimately you're only going to be able to, attract an elite, which is not what this industry needs, no matter what your brand is. You need to have widespread consumer acceptance. And then it's like saying, okay, I'm gonna legalize soft drinks, right? And there's fizzy water and there's sugar or fake sugar that you're adding to that and coloring, okay. And then the secret sauce of the recipe and the taste. All right, that's downstream of that and that's man-made. Sure, eventually there's going to be that kind of differentiation in a recreational market. But right now, the goal is to create a solid medical market that nobody can oppose politically anymore in an environment where you get the first people who are really sick access to a drug that they need. And even if it is 5, 6, 7 euros a gram at point of sale, that is then competitive with the black market. So but again, getting to that point is hard. It is, no matter what, it is also not necessarily attractive to a lot of the entrepreneurs who are coming into this, who are looking for, business models that say, I'm going to be in debt for 1 year and then be able to pay it back because I'm bringing in the best bud the world's ever seen and I'm going to charge a premium for it. And I only want, patients who are between 25 and 45 with lots of disposable income and, are male. That doesn't really get you very far. And while that's the easy go-to, even within the cannabis industry itself, obviously those are tactics which are increasingly seen as outdated. So
yeah. I'm curious, we've also seen a lot of a bit of a global shift in terms of psychedelics legalization as well. Do you think that this is a conversation that will happen in the European market, in the German market? What are your thoughts on the future of that space kind of on a European landscape?
Well, I think the entire conversation about psychedelics, the door has opened for sure, right? I think that there is the fact that there are United States or American states right now that are starting to go down the same path with, say, mushrooms, as happened with the cannabis discussion, is absolutely going to galvanize that and go forward. There are going to be other tests. I think that the conversation about the acceptance of these kinds of plant-based psychedelics, which until very recently was put in a closet and never discussed about and stigmatized up and down until yesterday, that has fundamentally changed. Now, I think that regulators in this market, in the European market, are going to be aware of, and certainly are, the mushrooms conversation, absolutely, okay? Because I think from, again, a systematic discussion about depression or mental illness that is debilitating, you're entering the same kinds of waters. Is it more difficult than cannabis? Absolutely. And part of that is because of the, I would say, not only stigma, but the psychological impact, the psychiatric, psychological, physiological impact of going on what is, I would say, a trip, right? Even if it's controlled, even if there's safe medication that's been grown in a GMP environment. I mean, EU GMP and mushrooms, not a conversation that has been had anywhere. It's just not that mainstream yet, but it's going to have to be, because the only way that they're going to be able to justify that, just as they did in the cannabis conversation, is medical use first. So I think that what's going to start to happen is that, sure, you're going to have Oregon, which I think has just legalized the use of mushrooms. Sure, that's going to spread to California, but I would say it's going to be probably 5 to 10 years before that conversation is going to be mainstream enough in Europe to really be had. And I think the cannabis conversation is going to push it. Because again, adding EU GMP to this plant was revolutionary enough. And the government here, which initially banned every single German firm from growing cannabis domestically on the basis that nobody had ever had this experience, ended up being pushed towards Canada, which may have had a recreational market, but they didn't really have EU GMP.
Yeah.
There was not a single producer in Canada coming here who had real EU GMP, and there were questions about, how many people really have that. As a result of that, in fact, a lot of Canadian firms have stopped sourcing directly from Canada and have started sourcing other places and putting it through a different system. But again, those are conversations that happen for the first time in the cannabis industry, and they will absolutely filter down into everything else. Again, as a child, I was born in 1967. Okay, the summer of love, peace out. And watched in my 20s or actually even teen years in the 80s and 20s and 30s as this sort of continual wave of criminalization and demonization burned itself out. Right. And I think that, your generation in particular will remember, even as of 2010, this was 15 years ago. This was an entirely different conversation everywhere. So thanks to social media, right? I mean, I think that this is a revolution that absolutely has benefited from social media in general. Thanks to social media, thanks to the pressure that's being put on authorities at this point, thanks to the fact that the science itself of this has begun to, again, it was really only the end of last century that, Meckelum had finally discovered and was able to describe the endocannabinoid system of the body. So it has really been a revolution that has been gathering steam as the prohibition, cogs rightly fall off. They're not off yet. There's a long way to go. But I think as of 2023, certainly in a place like Germany, there is enough of an impetus to force this as a public policy issue, no matter how imperfect, no matter what falls off the wagon, no matter how many scams have come through. And there's a big one that has just, exploded here in Germany and across Europe called Juicy Fields, which was actually about a firm that was raising money and it was basically a giant Ponzi scheme. But one of the reasons besides, COVID that they were so successful is because they were using small aspects and germs of truth about this industry and created a very effective story. But again, in a completely legal market, there was no real way for that kind of scam to perpetuate, because people will actually have more information about what's going on. They'll understand that this is the normal volume. It will be normalized even on investment, blogs, even if the mainstream media doesn't cover it. And there will be more information about a business which is legitimizing. That still is very, very hard to come by. Even if again, there are some, I would say savvy data analysis companies which have started to put together reports and are selling them for a great deal of money. But that is still, again, not, I would say, a reliable, accessible industry. You basically have to be in it, talk to people about pricing, understand the cost variations and the cost requirements of everything along the line, and then work really hard. That's basically what I'm seeing of the people who are now starting to succeed or put together better business models, is that they've sort of rethought what their role is, right? These are not companies that are interested in getting rich quick. They're interested in serving patients because they're made up of doctors, or because they have a greater social good mission, or. It's not because they're against profit, but I think that they're setting themselves up to be more sustainable, long-term companies that grow their business in a way that I would say is not only sustainable, but common sense. You're not raising money through, publicity on social media. You're actually going out there and creating sustainable revenue streams and marketing efforts that make sense and are compliant.
Absolutely. You know, I think that in any kind of industry, there are always going to be chance takers. There are always going to be people who try and get away with these kind of scams. But as you said, you know, as things become more structured, it becomes more difficult for people to get away with these kind of things. But there are also 2 points that you mentioned that I'd love to touch on. The one was, you know, the mainstream media covering these kind of things. And of course, you've been a journalist in this field for a long time. You've written books as well. What have you found some struggles or challenges writing within this space as opposed to writing on another topic or industry, which I'm sure you have?
Well, it's funny that you asked that. I mean, in the beginning, I would say way back, you know, a decade ago, when I was first sort of turning my interest towards writing about this. First of all, there was no one really doing it. There was nobody covering Europe in English to begin with. Even in the US, it was difficult to find people who were established journalists who were taking this seriously. When I was living in Dortmund, which was a small town in the north of Germany, about, I don't know, 2.5, 3 hours by train, maybe 4, in a place called the Ruhrgebiet, the Ruhr Valley, right near Holland. I actually came to the attention of the local police just for writing about it, because I was who is this freaking American chick living in da 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 and writing and da 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 da
Cannabis.
cannabis and like the whole thing. Obviously that attitude has changed a lot. There are more and more people writing about cannabis in a way that, you know, is, I would say, considered legitimate. I would say, however, the next piece of this is writing honestly about this industry. Yes, I have absolutely gone through periods of my career where I have found no other, you know, alternative but to write about the truth about this industry. And, you know, recently that has been discussions beyond any scam about valuations, about, you know, even viability. My last book about the cultivation bid specifically looked at the problematic financial structure of this industry as it existed at that point, as well as all of the issues downstream. Did that win me a lot of fans in this industry? No. Is it important? Yes. Do I have a following, including on social media, particularly LinkedIn at this point, from people who really like my writing? Yes, because I don't pull any punches, because I'm real, because to the extent that I might be working with a company or et cetera, I'm not going to allow my voice and, if you will, my brand to be polluted by BS, because there's a lot of people who do it, but I'm not a publicist, right? I don't exist to make your brand great just because you bought flour. I want to actually work with the people who I know are doing the right things at the right time. And also, to the extent that I want to write about those honestly, I should be allowed to do that. Have I been threatened before? Yes. Have I lost business before? Yes. I mean, I was fired from High Times. You know, everybody knows that, for writing 2 articles that my editor had asked me to write that were then pulled. You know, one was left up, but my name was yanked off of it on Juicy Fields. And a week later, last summer, I did a very comprehensive article on Cureleaf. That was immediately pounced from High Times, and I was fired. Okay, you know, and it, you know, I turned out to be right. 6 months down the road, all of a sudden, whoopsie daisy, there is in fact direct connecting evidence between Cureleaf and, you know, Roman Abramovich, no matter what the timing was. Those are things and conversations which have sometimes made me controversial. But again, I don't know any other way to be a part of this industry, because I'm not just interested in being, you know, a rah, let's just promote somebody for money. I don't want to do that. I am a patient. I think that there's a credibility that goes along with that. And I continue to want to participate in that conversation, because that's what makes my participation in this industry meaningful, not just to me, but other people who come later.
I absolutely love that. And I think that's so important because, you know, in this day and age, especially with social media, people are lying about a lot on the internet, right? So it's really important to have and especially with something like this, if we want to drive the industry forward, we shouldn't be, you know, spreading half truths and promoting, you know, things like that. So I really love your take on that, for sure.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's not, you know, it's not easy, but here's the thing, you know, as a woman also in this industry, I don't want to promote products or be in the position of promoting companies that take advantage of people in the system. I want to be on the side of people who are actually creating solutions. So, watch this space, because I'm actually starting to get involved in a very, very exciting project, which is going to give people better access on the ground to medical cannabis for starters, which will be very exciting. But that's because the company I'm working with has decided that they are going to take a very different approach to putting together their business. I can't really disclose too much now, but it's coming soon. So that's exciting, and being able to work in the business, on business stuff, as well as having a voice, is something that I've worked very hard for. It's not always easy. Standing up to people and calling people out is not something I particularly like doing, but I think that I have to, because, again, I want to see this industry succeed. I want to have investors know that they can, look at these companies with a certain kind of filter. And just because it's cannabis, there's not some giant, cannabinoid exemption to your business plan or returns or whatever else. I mean, it's like we're following the law. That is what is meaningful to me. And I think that's why being a part of this market in particular at this time is such an exciting, sometimes too exciting, proposition.
It's very exciting. I can't wait to see what you're working on. So we'll definitely be watching this space. And Marguerite, you spoke about being a woman in this industry. Has there been any kind of course, there are always challenges being a woman in any industry, I think, but anything that has stood out to you? Any advice maybe for other women in the industry?
Well, here's the thing. I think, am I somebody to give advice? I would say if you love what you do and you're passionate about it, no matter what it is, cannabis, art, music, business, whatever, you're going to succeed because you're going to try and find ways to be successful, right? No matter how difficult it is. I think that some of the bigger issues facing women certainly are access to being hired, being treated with respect, being paid. Certainly the statistics on money raising are still pretty dismal, and there are by far not, there's not enough equality, certainly within the management fields, management parts of this industry. But I would say that generally, this is an industry where more and more women are coming because they see it, they understand it. They're understanding that there are major health benefits for women for being involved in this. And that, I think, is something that will build. So to the extent that, I'm proud to be a person in cannabis. I'm proud to have done what I've done so far. I think that there are plenty of people who will, beat new paths of every age. That's the other thing about this. It's like, it's less age dependent, because again, the older you are, the other skills that you bring in from other industries, that's important. And you're also more likely, I'd say, to be a patient or be a potential patient. So you're creating something that hopefully will be accessible not only to yourself, but other people like yourself. That's kind of cool too.
Absolutely, and I think that a lot of the time people who enter this industry do have some kind of personal connection or personal story connected to the plant, which I think is very cool. And as you said, there are a lot of transferable skills. It's not just about whether you can be a master grower, for example, or a bud tender. There's so many transferable skills that can be brought into this industry, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and I would say certainly in a place like Europe, what you're seeing more is pharmacists or doctors, or that's the kind of jobs that you're actually starting to see, and less bud tenders or master growers. It's much more business or pharmaceutical related, and I think that will certainly continue. So.
For sure. And as we sort of come towards the end of things here today, Marguerite, I know that you spoke a little bit about technology, earlier on at the beginning. I know you're a bit of a self-proclaimed canna-tech geek as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the future of technology in the cannabis space. Are there any developments you've seen recently, or where do you see this kind of heading in the future?
Well, I should quote my late uncle, a man by the name of Peter Drucker. Technology is just a tool, right? So any technology that can be broadly useful in any kind of processing, wholesale, commodities business is probably going to be applicable in some way to the cannabis industry. Fair enough. And that includes blockchain, that includes banking applications, that includes any sort of application that helps you automate your grow and your supply chain. Absolutely. That said, I will say that I have seen, unfortunately, an awful lot of, support us, we're technology and cool because we're in cannabis. And that's not really something, I mean, it doesn't matter what the technology is. I would say that there are particularly strange efforts when you get into the promotion of platforms, whatever that is, because ultimately you have to have a critical mass of users. But when it comes to the consumer side, as of yet, there isn't one. As when it comes to the business side of this, that's where you start to get into all of these issues about whether it is marketing online using social media platforms or technology that groups people together for whatever reason. I mean, sure, it's great if you can create a solely, social media platform just for cannabis users, but I think that is probably going to be limited in effect because, in fact, people use like social media for a broad use. It's not just going to be because I like cars, I'm going to go on Facebook, or because I like, fancy shoes, I'm going to be on LinkedIn, or etc. I mean, you have to incorporate the specifics of technology, including social media, into what your real business is. And if your real business is selling cannabis laced cookies, then that's one thing, right? If your business is trying to, pass on news about this industry, that's another. If you're trying to find patients or clients, sure. I mean, again, I don't think that there's one specific kind of technology that's going to have a dramatic impact on this. I do think that this will be an industry that is increasingly automated. Yes, I continue to believe that social media will play a powerful role in this, as much as it has been used, unfortunately, for its negative points as well. And I think that, if you think about this as no more than, and not to simplify this too much, it's no more than a plant, right? That's all this is. So to the extent that it's normalized in the way that technology is utilized in our lives, sure. I mean, I'm looking forward to the apps that I know are coming that are going to eventually give cannabis consumers the ability to price shop and find what is, actually on sale down at your local dispensary or even pharmacy. Right now, however, the technology allowing that, it's not even the technological capability, it's the regulations allowing the technology to do that, which are also in a different place. So technology, again, is not any instant cure-all, but if it can be used to further your business objectives, sure. I mean, there's a lot of places that this industry needs to move into the 21st century, needs to move into, a world where it is better automated and et cetera. But again, there are some big gaps in the ability to do that and the ability to be successful doing that.
Yeah, I think there again there are a lot of growing pains, and I think we'll see what happens in the future, right? And Marguerite, as we come towards the end now, I just want to first of all say thank you so much for being a part of the CanMar Morning Talk Show. It's been really great to talk to you. Do you have anything that you would like to add? Any fun thoughts for our viewers or listeners today?
Stay green.
I love that.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching or listening to the CanMar Morning Talk Show. Join us next time for your weekly dose of cannabis and psychedelics updates from the industry's experts. But wait, before you go, did you know that CanMar is leading global change within the cannabis and psychedelics industry? We are building customizable ecosystems, providing solutions to recruitment, offering regulatory and compliance services, and community hub for the global network. Some might say we are the future. If you haven't already, download the CanMar Hub app or check out our website at canmar.io to see what we're getting up to. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button below to hear more juicy insights from the movers and shakers of the cannabis and psychedelics industry. Until next time, stay dope.